One really powerful thing you can do with the Behavior Designer is to combine multiple behaviors on a single group. I'm going to make a button press behavior for this button, but I also want to have a hover effect. And I'm going to do this by creating two behaviors separately, one for the button press and one for the hover, and apply them both to the group around this button. So behaviors are always applied to groups, so I'm going to add a group around this button. I'll call it my button, and I'll click the behavior button to add a behavior. I'm going to call this behavior hover, because this will be the hover effect, and I'll create a button hover effect, which is really easy. First, think about what states you'll need. I've got the initial state, and I want to have a hover state. In the hover state, I'll fade this out a little bit. That'll be the hover effect for this button. So about 50% opacity. Now I've got my two states. Now think about how you'll link between them. So from the initial state, I'll link to the hover state with a mouse over gesture. And from the hover state, back to the initial state with a mouse out gesture. Okay, I'll open up the preview real quick and just test that out. So when I hover over, I see the hover effect. Looks great. Now I can, I'll add a group here, my other button for this purple button, and I'll apply the same hover effect that I just created. So I have a hover behavior on the purple one now, and looks like both those are working. All right, cool. Now I want to have a button press behavior that makes the button shrink when I click on it. And so I'm going to apply it to the exact same group. I've got my button, this group, which has a hover behavior. I'm going to click in the inspector here under behaviors, add behavior, new behavior. And that's going to add an additional behavior to the same group. I'll call this one press, and I'll make a new state called pressed. Simple behavior. This is one of our behavior designer tutorials on our website if you want to see a full rundown of how to make a button press effect. But I'm going to use a touchdown going to the pressed state, and the button will be a bit smaller in that state. And from that state back to the initial state, there'll be a touch up as well as a mouse out. All right, cool. We'll save and exit out of the behavior designer. And now notice I've got the press behavior and the hover behavior, both on the same group. In the preview, you can see the hover effect and the press effect. They combine together, so you can use them in conjunction. It's great because I can think of them independently, design them independently, but then combine them. It allows you to make these behaviors more easily, it's less confusing, also allows you to sometimes achieve effects that aren't possible otherwise, and it lets you reuse them independently. So I've still got the hover effect on this purple button, but not the press effect. And maybe I want that. Or maybe I want just the press effect and not the hover effect. Or maybe I want both. So I've added both to the purple button now. So both of these work that way. You can do the same thing with scroll gestures. You can have two different scroll ranges and two different behaviors that animate a couple different things. There's a lot of possibilities when you combine behaviors.